I hold here in my hand an unassuming piece of concrete. It's been painted yellow along one side with brown speckles, but apart from that, it's really nothing much to look at. And in fact, perhaps its most interesting aspect is how unremarkable it seems. I picked this up in the gift shop of the Deutschland Museum in Berlin on my first trip to Germany, a country whose culture, language, and history fascinate me. And its history is what I would like to start with today, because this piece of SOTS, or Soviet pop art, by Dmitry Vrubel, Mein Gott, hilf, diese tödliche Liebe zu überleben, or, in English, My God, help me to survive this deadly love, would not exist without the context of one of the most interesting events in Germany's long and convoluted history, the Mauerfall, or the fall of the wall. And this is not just a piece of concrete. It's a piece of history and of the Berlin Wall, or Berliner Mauer, which separated East and West Germany. It divided friends, families, and lovers, and unfortunately was the site of over 140 deaths. I'd like to take you back now to 1979, East Berlin. Here, it's been 30 years since East Germany was founded, and celebrations are in full swing. Leonid Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union, is visiting Erich Honecker, the East German leader, in honour of the occasion. During the visit, Reggie Bossu takes this photo of the two in the customary socialist Bruderkuss, or fraternal kiss. What's important to know before we go on is that Brezhnev and Honecker are both corrupt men, hostile to political reforms and leading states that treat opposition with heavy censorship and suppression. So long as they keep their hold on power, East Germany will celebrate many more anniversaries to come. But a lot changes in 10 years. It's now 1989, and Mikhail Gorbachev leaves the Soviet Union. He's a reformer, preaching glasnost, openness, and working to democratize the Soviet bloc. He too visits Honecker in East Berlin to mark 40 years of East Germany's founding. At the time of the visit, revolution has been in the air for months. The East Germans are sick of their government, and belief in the state is dying out. 1 month later, among a frenzied, euphoric crowd, the wall comes toppling down. 1 year after the fall of the wall, Dmitry Vrubel arrives in Berlin from Moscow and paints this work onto the wall in Berlin's slowly forming East Side Gallery, which he then repainted in 2009. At the time of the original painting, Vrubel had been working on art inspired by Bossu's photograph for years, obsessed with the image he described as repulsive, of two men capable of great cruelty and with the lives and freedoms of millions of ordinary people under their control in such a vulnerable moment. I, in turn, found myself fascinated by the art this obsession led to. The text on the mural, Mein Gott, hilf mir, diese tödliche Liebe zu überleben, in English means, My God, help me to survive this deadly love. The Russian, Gospodi, pomogi mnie vyžít sredi etoj smrtnoj ljubvi, can be translated as, Lord, help me to stay alive amongst this mortal love. At the time, Vrubel wrote the caption to apply to himself. He had to choose between two women whom he both loved. However, another interpretation is to see it as the outcry of the citizens these men ruled over. East Germany, for example, was a surveillance state. The secret police, or Stasi, ensured that all citizens obeyed the government through a meticulous network of agents and informants. And if you decided to resist the government, consequences would follow. Your loved ones might lose prestigious positions, and you yourself could be dragged off somewhere like Hohenschönhausen, a bleak prison complex, where they would do their best to break your spirit, so you never resisted again. This so-called deadly love, a metaphor perhaps for the corruption these men were both part of, and their close allyship, was something many would indeed have been begging God to survive. The use of God's name too runs deeper as may seem. The Protestant church in East Germany was a key figure in the Friedliche Revolution, or peaceful revolution, which culminated in Germany's reunification, providing meeting spaces for activist groups and organising mass protests after having been stifled by the state for decades. Vrubel's chosen caption satisfies a double meaning, both his own personal one, but also one that lays bare a decades-long prayer of the East German citizens that was, in the end, answered. When painting, Vrubel said he felt as if he was between the lips of the two men, and this same feeling is, I believe, experienced by the viewer. Their faces are enlarged, grotesque in their detail. This is no traditional romantic kiss, not a Rodin or a Klimt. In fact, a photograph taken of a gesture meant to humanize these leaders has been twisted to expose them as monstrous political powers. Brezhnev and Honecker's closed eyes create lines which draw the viewer's eye into the center of the piece, where their lips meet. This feels like a private moment that we are intruding on. However, this intimacy is carefully orchestrated to show exactly the closeness between these men that they want us to see. Vrubel comments on this by leaving out the people in the background of Bossy's photograph, meaning we are left to focus on the only part of the photo we are supposed to be looking at, the passionate propaganda Bruderkuss. Vrubel also makes use of colour to expose the political nature of his work. Brezhnev is painted as tinted red and Honecker as tinted yellow, colours shared by the flags of East Germany and the Soviet Union. Additionally, Brezhnev is shown as more dominant. He takes up more space, just as Russia would have done politically and geographically, compared to the smaller, more submissive East Germany. The blue background may be a reference to the patriotic song Lied von der blauen Fahne, or Song of the Blue Flag. Vrubel emphasizes it in so many ways that in this moment Brezhnev and Honecker are one, brought together by a love, perhaps for communism or socialism, perhaps simply for control. But this love that unites them so closely is what they cited as the reason for the spreading of fear and the political, ideological, and physical isolation of the Soviet Union. This was one of Vrubel's motivations for painting this work onto the wall, to counter a symbol of division with one of unity, a motivation which drew me to choose this work. It really speaks to me in our modern world, in which we are all familiar with concepts of isolation and division, especially after having spent the majority of the COVID-19 pandemic within our homes. And its effects can still be seen globally. Vrubel himself passed away from complications related to the disease. Additionally, in the case of the UK, and England especially, there seems to be a rising national resonance with the image of Britain as a lone island nation, able to survive just fine without any help from its European neighbours. Brexit is a clear sign of this, although our recent agreement to re-enter into the Erasmus scheme has provided a small sign of hope for reconnection. According to figures from the Campaign to End Loneliness, current levels of loneliness are higher even than they were at the height of the pandemic. And there's a certain group of people capitalising on this to convince us that we can unite and find community in hatred of the other. And that if we don't, we belong to that other and we stand alone. Once more, walls are being driven up, just not physically. The Germans have a phrase that fits well here, one used to describe the divide East and West still experience 36 years after the wall itself fell. Die Mauer im Kopf, or the wall in the mind. As I mentioned at the beginning of this speech, last December I got to go on a trip to Berlin, where Vrubel's artwork is located. I saw the era of history I've been speaking about broken down in countless museums and memorials. And of course, I got to see parts of the wall. We walked through where it would have stood to go for dinner. Just like that, the Great Grey Barrier now stands tame in stretches of about a metre here or there throughout the city. It stands as a reminder, not just of history, but of hope, and hope that is not unfounded. A reminder that we are not alone. We never were. And so long as we strive to create communities based on the understanding and celebration of our differences, we will forever be stronger than the people trying to divide us. Thank you very much for listening.